if our partner does or says something that tends to kind of bring us back there, we're not going to be consciously thinking, oh my gosh, this reminds me of my third grade teacher, but we're just going to respond in a way that we did as a child.
Hello, and welcome to ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. I am your host, Jorie Houlihan. I am an ADHD life coach, speaker, and fellow late diagnosed ADHDer. I want to welcome today's guest, Kayla Crane. Kayla is a licensed marriage and family therapist that specializes in relationships, mental health, and trauma. She provides talk therapy, couples therapy, relationship coaching, and EMDR therapy for adults and couples. Kayla offers practical insights and tools for those looking to enhance their relational and emotional well-being. Welcome to the show, Kayla.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited about this. ADHD, as I'm sure you know, impacts relationships in so many ways.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to talk to somebody who this is what you do. You work with couples. So I've been very excited about talking with you today. So my first question is, what led you to becoming a couples therapist?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a therapist for a while but I always thought couples was very intimidating. Even though I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist, I expected to always work with individuals. And then I just worked at a practice and they said, hey, you've got to work with a couple. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was so freaked out. But it turned out I really loved it. And I do think it works well with my ADHD brain because it keeps me more stimulated. There's always something going on in a couples session, sometimes individual sessions. Well, often they're much slower. And so I think it definitely keeps me more engaged and attentive. And so there's more exciting. I just really like it. And I like that you can really see the result. Is therapy working or not? Are they staying together or are they not?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's great too that you are a therapist who has ADHD. So you really understand the perspective in terms of it's not just from the clinical, I don't have it, but kind of get it kind of way, but you get it. So that's awesome. Okay. So for our listeners who weren't diagnosed with ADHD until adulthood, how have you seen that not knowing aspect shape their relationship patterns or conflicts?
So, yeah, it can be really hard. One of the things that gets missed so much when people think about ADHD, they think of attention, concentration, focus, that kind of stuff. But what I've noticed is one of the biggest pieces is really the trouble with emotion regulation. That it can really significantly impact a relationship. It can impact the person experiencing it because things feel like a really big deal. A lot of things feel like a big deal. And we all have things, neurodivergent or not, from our childhood that shows up and we'll be responding to a situation that's not in front of us necessarily. It might be from our past. But when you pair that with ADHD and the difficulty with emotion regulation, a lot of things can feel really critical and like an emergency or just almost intolerable. And that really, sometimes they are tolerable when in a perfect world if we're experiencing them when we're very regulated. But with the ADHD and the difficulty with emotion regulation, that can really be an added challenge.
Well, let's just kind of dive into the biggest part of emotional dysregulation. I'm sure you know that, and that is that rejection sensitive dysphoria, also known as RSD. Okay, so this is kind of a two-part question. So the first part is, how do you explain RSD to couples? And then second, what are some real life ways that you have seen it show up in conflict or everyday misunderstandings with couples?
So, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, it's not one of the formal criteria that you find in the DSM, but there is a lot of research on it. And it gives a name to an experience that a lot of us do have with ADHD. So, it refers to the very severe reactions to perceived rejection or criticism. So sometimes it is actual rejection and criticism. Sometimes it might not be, but it'll still be the same response. That response, it stems from a couple different factors. One is being the neurological sensitivity that just comes with ADHD, the differences in how our brain works, that it makes it hard with ADHD to distinguish a actual threat from not an actual threat. That goes into the difficulty with emotion regulation. But in addition to that, somebody with ADHD, especially somebody who is diagnosed late in life, has experienced a lifetime of invalidation and criticism for who they are. And so if you pair those two together, it creates a much heightened sensitivity to anything that feels or seems like rejection.
Yeah, I think it is, how you said that it's not a formal criteria. And I know that Dr. Russell Barkley has said, we need to get that in the criteria because it is such a big part of it.
Yes.
And I was actually really surprised when I did start medication how much it helped my emotional regulation because I was unaware that that was part of it in the beginning.
Yeah.
But it really does impact so many things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, they need to get that fixed. I almost don't want to ask this question. So, what are some common mistakes that you see partners make when they are responding to RSD? And what are some more supportive approaches? Because telling somebody who is in RSD that they're overreacting or to relax, it's not work ever. So, so what are some common mistakes that you see people make?
Yeah, absolutely. Invalidation that's a big one, right?
Yeah.
And so I tell people often that your feelings are real and that is valid no matter what. It's also not necessarily a fact. Being in a healthy relationship, you can work as a team with that. I kind of joke with my husband, like anything can make me feel rejected. It doesn't take much. For example, one thing that really makes me feel rejected, it took some time for me to recognize, but if I'm talking to him and if he grabs his phone for whatever reason, if he gets a message and if he looks down, I have like this intense reaction because I'm really feeling rejected. And we've done a lot of work, and where when he says, I'm not rejecting you, that doesn't help. And that again feels invalidating and almost a little bit more rejecting.
Mhm.
And so instead, it's my responsibility to keep in mind that I really do feel rejected and that's valid. And it's not necessarily a fact that he is rejecting me. And then on his end, the relationality piece would be him to recognize like, this is something that Kayla sometimes deals with. We've established that she has more of a tendency to feel rejected. And so I can be a little bit more considerate about that. Right. And so now he is intentional and he tries to not pick up his phone if it dings or whatever when we're talking, or we've come up with a plan ahead of time, right? Where, hey, if that happens, can you say, hey, this is important to me. I want to hear what you're saying. And I've got this. So just give me a minute. So just being considerate of each other. It's both partners' responsibility. It's mine to recognize that this is real and like this is really how I'm feeling. And it's not necessarily a fact. This is also something I struggle with. And then it's also my partner's responsibility to say, this is something she struggles with. And so I'm just going to do my best to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, it's the perceived part of it, right? That of that definition of RSD, that it's not necessarily a real thing. And I find myself often when I am in one of those going, okay, does the world really hate you? Probably not. What are some common misunderstandings between partners when one person has ADHD, especially if it went unrecognized for a long period of time?
Yeah. So as children, we create all the beliefs about ourselves. That's when they all start to originate. If somebody has undiagnosed ADHD, they're likely going to create some kinds of beliefs of, I'm not good enough or there's something wrong with me. That's usually a result of being, getting in trouble or criticized by parents or teachers for forgetting homework or talking too much, not paying attention, being fidgety, forgetting things, that kind of stuff. We can respond to something that's not in front of us. And so if our partner does or says something that tends to kind of bring us back there, we're not going to be consciously thinking, oh my gosh, this reminds me of my third grade teacher, but we're just going to respond it in a way that we did as a child. And so, as a child, if we used to respond to that by trying to maybe overcompensate or fix things, that's probably what's going to show up when we feel that same response. If we responded by shutting down, which that shows up a lot, then that's probably how it's going to show up. And so, we might have a response that doesn't seem to match what's actually happening, and that's just coming from back then, all of those beliefs that were formed as a child.
That is so interesting. I never really thought about the fact that we would be reacting that the same way
Yeah,
as we did back then. That's a very interesting thing. I never thought about
yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm just, as you're saying it, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is making some things make sense. Okay. So, how do late ADHD diagnosis in women tend to change the dynamics or the narratives within a couple?
So, I think people think of ADHD and they just think, "Oh, you forget things all the time," and all of that, and there's so much more than that. But I think there is, like, such a stereotype. People really look at it sometimes just very surface level, and there can be a stigma and some judgment against that. It can be invalidating, I guess is a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Someone might say, "Oh, well, you're just doing that because you're 80." And it's no, that's not always the cause.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to the emotion dysregulation piece, that doesn't mean that things aren't like a big deal. Sometimes things really are a big deal and it's very valid to have that dysregulation. Sometimes people like partners can maybe unintentionally invalidate what's actually going on and kind of lumping it into, oh, this is just you and your ADHD kind of thing, and minimize what's actually the experience going on.
Yeah, I see that a lot with in the community that I work with, and it's a lot of, well, some people will say after they get their diagnosis, "I feel like it's gotten worse." And I said, I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's more, first of all, there's something about getting the diagnosis that is incredibly validating in and of itself. And so the mask starts to drop a little bit because we're like, okay, I don't have to keep up this facade. And I don't think it's a conscious thing, but I think there's a little bit of relaxation with the mask.
Yeah.
And so then maybe more of the things that you had been suppressing start showing up. But I also hear people say, my family saying, oh, you just blame everything on your ADHD. You're blaming everything on your ADHD. And I said, I don't know it so much as that you're blaming it, but that you're naming it because you're discovering a lot of it too. Because, like you said, there's so much misinformation out there about it and stereotypes. And a lot of people, when they get diagnosed, they really still think it's just losing things and squirrel,
Yeah.
right? And so I found for myself, I would be like, "Oh, that's ADHD," right? It wasn't me blaming it. It was like, "Okay, now I know what that
Yeah.
is." And, I tell people all the time, ADHD is an explanation, but it's not an excuse. Sometimes that's hard to figure out, but what if this is really causing me a struggle?
Mhm.
It's like, well, that's okay. Own that. But then also, your part in this is, what can I do? Because some things are always going to be a struggle, but I think that those are things to think about. So, in your experience, what are some of the more subtle ways that ADHD can impact the communication, but the emotional connection or intimacy in especially long-term relationships? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think, to go back to like that rejection sensitivity dysphoria, sometimes when somebody feels that sense of rejection, things kind of go offline, and you can kind of just really focus on that and really kind of get stuck there. Pair that with that challenge of managing your emotions. That can really be consuming. You could be having a conversation with your partner and feel really rejected. And then you could really be trying to manage that. And I don't want to act out. I don't want to do something that I'm going to regret. But that's consuming. You're probably not paying much attention to what they're saying because you're spending so much of your focus and attention on managing yourself. You can really be focused internally while trying to be a good partner, trying to be listening or doing whatever. And I don't want to make this about, what I'm feeling. You might even recognize this is a me thing. I'm feeling rejection. I'm not being rejected. Just trying to manage that can really be consuming. And I think we probably feel that in a lot of places in our lives, in interactions, maybe at work or talking to people, just really focusing on, okay, I don't want to be doing whatever, just so hyper focused on not exhibiting a behavior that you're kind of missing the whole point.
I feel like that's how for me it is when I'm trying to not interrupt.
Yes.
And I'm like, don't interrupt, don't interrupt. And I will have this conversation with myself like, is what I want to say really going to add to the conversation? And I'm going through this and meanwhile, I'm not listening to anything they're saying.
Right.
And so I'm trying to not be rude, but I also don't want to forget what I'm going to say. But is it really important that I talk about it? You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, if we talk about intimacy, like, let's be honest, sometimes like mind wanders
Yeah.
and partners don't always understand that. And it's like, seriously, it's not you. It really isn't. You're great. Just,
Right. Yeah. And,
yeah.
just struggling with staying present, I think is like
Hmm.
the big piece there. Add that with like overstimulation. I can just get so overstimulated that I can feel irritable just because of all the clutter, the noise or the sounds or the smells or whatever is going on. And I'm trying to be present. My husband and I went to Vegas last year, and there's so many sounds and smells and things in Vegas.
Yeah.
All the lights and everything, I would just get so overwhelmed and dysregulated. And that creates irritability. And so that makes it really hard. And I would have to, let me just go back to the room for a little bit and chill out and quiet.
And what's interesting is I have seen when people really start to understand what is triggering for them, like that kind of thing. Once you understand that, then you can start to look for tools that are going to help you. So, like you said, like you're like, I need to go back to the room for a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you're asking for what you need. And so many people try to just push through it. And I'm like, no, just like go take 5, 10, 30 minutes, whatever it takes to just let yourself decompress.
Yeah.
And then you can enjoy yourself. You're allowed to enjoy yourself. And if your partner's not understanding about that, that should maybe tell you something too.
Yeah.
So, my feeling on that. But anyway, but this then kind of leads into my next question because so many of my listeners struggle with self blame, feeling like they're too much in relationships. Like if I say, I need to go decompress, that's being too much, or having just the emotional dysregulation in general. So, what would you say to someone who fears that their ADHD is too hard for a partner to handle?
I think what you're saying, that's one of my favorite phrases, an explanation, not an excuse. I was explaining it to my daughter the other day, and I was like, it's just that your brain works differently. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It's just somebody's brain thinks a little bit differently, and that's okay. It just thinks differently than most people. It's not a bad way or anything. And there
Yeah.
are a lot of really great things that come along with ADHD, but it's just you got to learn the way that my brain works. And this is the way that I work with that. Just like somebody who is short, they operate a little bit differently than somebody who is not short. We all operate in a way that works best for us. And so I think trying to remove the shame, but it is so hard because there has been so much, especially like I said, later diagnosis without being able to identify it. Then if people are given the message, there's just something wrong with you. Just be different. Just don't be yourself, essentially. It's really hard to like disconnect those beliefs. But I think just trying to just be accepting and recognize this is just how I am different.
Well, actually, Jessica McCabe, she has a YouTube channel called How to ADHD, and she's great. And she actually was trying to give like, I don't know if this is a metaphor or whatever, but I missed that day in English class, but like to explain how the difference between using ADHD as an explanation versus an excuse.
Mhm.
She said an excuse would be, I'm short, get that thing off that shelf for me. Whereas an explanation would be, you know what, I'm short. Can you help me get that ladder so that I can get X, Y, or Z, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And how I explain in terms of like how our brains operate differently. I'm like, it's literally a different operating system. I said, so while the rest of the world is a PC, we have Mac brains. And the Mac brain isn't the problem. The problem is that we were given the PC manual to work with. And so that's why, like, when you hit, I don't know which key it is, like command on a Mac keyboard, it works very differently than on a PC keyboard, right? It's not right or wrong. It's just different. And so when you can figure out what your owner manual was supposed to say,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that can make a big difference. And worrying about whether or not your ADHD is too hard for somebody. In my book, like, as I kind of insinuated earlier, if your partner is not tolerant of that, like, you don't want to be with somebody who's only tolerant of it either. You want somebody who's going to love you because of it almost, because we certainly keep things exciting. That's what I say. I tell my husband all the time, you would be so bored without
Yeah.
me. Like, he's like, yeah, I could maybe use a little less excitement sometimes, but yes, that. And we have two ADHD kids, right? So runs in families. It's never boring in my house. But you should ask yourself, one of the things I've really tried to instill in my kids is the difference between fitting in and belonging.
Mhm.
And I'm like, fitting in is when you have to change who you are to be accepted, and belonging is getting to be exactly who you are, quirks, tangents, ADHD, whatever, and still be
Yeah.
accepted. And so you always want to aim for belonging. You may not have as many people surrounding you, but the ones who are surrounding you are there for you. You want to surround yourself with people who are rooting for your
Mhm.
success. And when you are not in the room, they're speaking very highly of you and they want to help you. So, anyway, my little soapbox
Yeah.
there. When both partners are navigating invisible struggles, right? So, like undiagnosed ADHD, anxiety, trauma, autism, I mean, so many things, right? What helps them break out of shame or resentment spirals?
I think number one, like understanding, because like I said, childhood creates all the beliefs in us and all of those things. And like you mentioned, I do some EMDR, so I am trained to do trauma work. So the type of couples therapy I do does incorporate some like inner child work and stuff. A lot of modalities do those individually, but I find it so valuable to do it in the presence of your partner because then they can understand. When I talked to somebody who felt they were always getting in trouble for forgetting their homework, so they didn't feel good enough. Well, when you're in a relationship and your partner is now saying, God, why didn't you order the dog food or whatever? That really kind of brings them back, feels like that. Is there a way that we can do that a little differently? Make a
Mm.
request rather than Chris or whatever it is. But I think like the most beneficial thing is just for like insight, your partner to really get it, to understand whatever that means. If it means your earlier beliefs and traumas, then as comfortable as possible, like it is to share with them, but also just to educate themselves on what is ADHD, not it's more than focus concentration. Learn about like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, learn about the emotion regulation piece, learn about the masks people with neurodivergence wear. My advice to everyone when you don't know what to do, get curious. Just ask questions.
Yeah.
Just want to know more and like that's going to usually guide you in the right direction.
I say that all the time. That's like my tagline basically. I'm like, stay
Yeah.
curious. Because when you're looking at, so for example, if you have just been diagnosed and you're trying to figure out your ADHD, don't look at it from this place of judgment. Just be curious about it. Ask questions about it. If you have an emotional outburst because you got overstimulated, first apologize if you directed it at somebody, but then just get curious about it. Like, what triggered it? What happened right before that? Like, what's something we can do about it? Like you said, I just feel that judgment just brings more judgment, but curiosity brings questions. So I'm really happy that you said that. So I'm like, okay, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Yay. And in terms of, so to kind of talk about the trauma aspect of it, because often ADHD can create trauma, right? And there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not trauma can cause ADHD. I think the jury is still out on that technically I still think it causes ADHD like symptoms. I haven't seen enough evidence otherwise. However, it still feels very real obviously to them. Could you talk a little bit more before we started filming? I told you that I had experienced EMDR. I live in Highland Park, Illinois. We had a mass shooting back in at 4th of July a few years ago. I wasn't even there. I was down the street from it, but I couldn't believe, like, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't think. I was like, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So I was told to go where they were having the people who had actually been there go. And I was like, well, should I be there? And they're like, yeah, you need to go. You're in shock,
Yeah.
basically. And so there were all these therapists that came in from all over. And one of them, she did like a mini EMDR session with me. And I could not believe the difference in like a 10 or 15-minute
Mhm.
session. So can you talk a little bit about like how EMDR works? Because I think it's such an amazing tool for people if they have access to it. And I've seen people, friends of mine, they're going through kind of some kind of trauma therapy and they're raving about it. But I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is.
Yeah.
That's a long-winded way of asking you to do that.
Yeah.
Explain it.
No, it's EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So a trauma, it's not the event. That's not what trauma is. Trauma is the belief that that event creates inside of you. So when you experience something, somebody who experienced a shooting or something like that, they might either create or reinforce a belief of I'm not safe or no, I'm not going to be protected, something like that. So even though it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, what it really is bilateral stimulation. So right to left. Eye movements, we're using the moving the eyes right to left, but people also do it with like just tapping or like buzzers in their hand. It's just the right to left movement. So the first piece is the desensitization. So we desensitize what that event is. We take that emotional charge out of it, which means that you shouldn't have a trigger, like you shouldn't be triggered again when you
Mhm.
have that whatever reminds you of it. But then the reprocessing piece is we take that belief and we remove the belief with the desensitization, and then we reprocess it, put a new, more realistic, more helpful belief, which might be I can protect myself, or I am able to keep myself safe, or something. It has to be believable, but
Mhm.
that's what we do. Even to go back to when I said we create beliefs as children, someone might not think that being told, why can't you remember your homework is a trauma, but the reason it's a trauma is because that child might now believe there's something wrong with me because I didn't forget my homework. So it doesn't have to be some huge thing to be considered a trauma. A
Yeah.
trauma just means that it was created a negative belief about yourself. So with EMDR, yeah, we can desensitize it and then reprocess it, create a newer, more productive, a better belief.
Yeah. That is very, very interesting. I think the whole mind body connection thing is just such an amazing thing. I was a clinical massage therapist in another life, and combining that with energy work and all of that, I think it's just very cool. And like I said, EMDR was amazing for me. And so if you are somebody out there who has experienced trauma and you have access to an EMDR therapist near you, you should definitely think about using it because it really it's been so helpful for so many people. I'm clearly an
Yeah.
advocate, is what I'm saying. Okay. So, all right, we've kind of touched on this already, but so how do you help couples move away from blame and toward practical, compassionate problem solving, especially when ADHD behaviors can look a lot like carelessness or lack of
Yeah.
effort?
Yeah, I think once again, just like having that understanding, but it takes both people. It takes the person who is engaging in those behaviors to be accountable, but also, like I said, just with the rejection piece, my example with my husband, is that I know that it's taken me time to and a lot of work to learn how to get regulated and not respond when we're talking if he grabs his phone, to get completely dysregulated and operate in a way that I don't want to. That's been my own responsibility. I've had to work with my own therapy, with meditation, with mindfulness, journaling, all of these things to be able to better regulate myself and manage those. Also, again, relationality is my husband saying, I know that this is something that Kayla struggles with. And instead of him saying, that's a you thing, I'm not rejecting you when I'm doing that, that doesn't work well. But instead saying like, hey, this is something that you struggle with. So I'm going to try my best to be intentional within reason to do things that help you. A question I ask people a lot is like, what would it cost you here? What would it cost you to not pick up your phone when it rings or ask for a break or whatever it is? Just working as a team, we're not always going to be at our best and our partner's not always going to be at our best. I always talk about like my husband. Okay, I am dysregulated quite often, but he is regulated quite often. So he compliments me well and he can kind of let
Yeah.
me borrow some of his regulation when I need it. And
Mhm.
he can borrow some of my really exciting, really cool behaviors, but, so I think just being relational in that way, like, where can you support your partner in ways that because they're your partner and you love them, for only that reason, if you can do it, then do it.
It's interesting that you just mentioned how you can borrow some of his
Mhm.
regulation because I had just heard on another podcast, they were talking about body doubling
Yeah,
basically. And that one of the reasons that that is effective is because you regulate each other's nervous system when you're
yeah.
working. And I was like, that's why this works so well.
Mm.
Okay, now I get it. So, a couple more questions here. How do you help a partner who does not have ADHD better understand what the activation wall or that task paralysis feels like so that they can offer real support rather than the criticism?
You know I don't think you always need to understand what it's like. That's great if you can, getting curious. And I think a great thing that you can ask your partner is, can you tell me more about that? And what was that like for you? And really wanting to know, just like how we learn anything in life, right? Is we learn more about it. But sometimes things are just not going to make sense to you. And like, does it need to make sense? Or is this something that your partner, this is something they deal with? And can you support them in that?
That's actually a good point. I think having come from a place of being misunderstood a lot in my lifetime, right? I'm always trying to make sure that I and it's not it doesn't always work well when I do that, but, like, trying to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing so that there isn't the misunderstanding, which usually ends up causing more misunderstanding sometimes. But you're right, like, they don't have to necessarily know what it feels like per
Yeah.
se. They just but knowing that it exists, understanding maybe the mechanics of it per
Yeah.
se might be enough. Last question, are there red flags that suggest that a couple might need outside help versus what they can realistically work on at home?
Yeah, I mean, I think just when you're getting stuck, when it's, why aren't you getting this? Like, what is happening here? Obviously, when you're not able to resolve the conflict, sometimes that's just like the benefit of therapy is just having a neutral outside perspective. I mean, people say all the time, like, if I say something and their partner will go, "Oh my gosh, that makes sense." And then they say, "How come when you said it, they're listening, but when I've been saying it for years, they're not listening?" Well, that's kind of just one of the benefits of therapy. And I mean, I think it is a frustrating piece, but everyone has that experience. I compare therapy to going to the doctor. Like, it doesn't have to mean anything. When you're not feeling well, you go to the doctor, you get better, and then you don't go. And then until you go again, until you're not feeling well again, and then you go again. It doesn't have to mean this catastrophic thing. It's like, oh, we just got to go and strengthen up some skills, or we're kind of on the wrong, we're not on the same page here. But when somebody's feeling invalidated, when they're feeling like not good about themselves and it's not getting better, and that's might be resulting in them shutting down, them walling off, them not wanting to be vulnerable. If you're getting to that place, that's going to be incredibly damaging to your relationship if you don't get on the same page. And so if you're finding yourself not wanting to engage or feeling kind of like hopeless or just so discouraged, then yeah, it might be a good idea to just kind of go in and get back on track and then have those tools to just go forward.
I think there's some people that they maybe did therapy like years before and they didn't get much from it. And so they think it doesn't really work. But I think that first of all, it's a different dynamic when it is a couple, but also it just because it didn't necessarily work back then doesn't mean it won't work now. And it's a different therapist. Okay, so we are now going to do the rapid fire round. So I'm going to throw out a few questions and just answer whatever comes off the top of your
Okay.
head. Okay. All right. So first question is, what is a myth about ADHD in relationships you wish would disappear?
There's just about focus and concentration.
Good answer. With you on that. All right. What is one thing you wish all neurotypical partners knew?
I think again that it's not about just focus and concentration. I know I sound like a broken record with that, but it's so important that, emotion regulation is a challenge. So just be patient. This is just something your partner experiences. And that doesn't mean you've got to be okay with experiencing poor treatment or anything, but just having a little bit of grace that this is what my partner kind of struggles with. And of course, that sensitivity to rejection.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. My biggest problem with ADHD is out of sight, out of
Yeah.
mind. So,
Yeah.
that's not even on the list that most people even think about. All right. So what is a go-to strategy for diffusing a heated moment?
Taking a break. But the key
Good idea.
is that when you take a break, especially again, the heated moment is going to result in the ADHD partner feeling probably quite dysregulated. So if their partner can notice that and they say, hey, let's take a break, but the key is to say, and we'll come back to this in 2 hours. Otherwise, it just feels like more rejection. But when you can do that, then it feels like support. Like, okay, I care about you. This is important to me. And it's not working right now. Let's take a break. We'll come right back here in 2 hours and let's figure it out from there.
And we all know that people with ADHD need external deadlines.
Yeah.
So there we go. It works really well. What is the best piece of advice that you have ever received about relationships, personal or professional?
I think just validating in general, like how to validate how valuable validation can be. You don't need to agree with somebody to validate them. So I think that, and then that your feelings are real, but they're not facts. And so keeping that in mind. So my feelings are real and they're valid, and it's not necessarily a fact that what I'm feeling is actually occurring.
Yes. The validation aspect of it is a
Yeah.
big deal, I think. We don't I don't think we focus on that enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Kayla. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I've learned a lot. I know my audience has learned a lot. I'm going to have all of your information in the show notes so that people can find you because you are in the Denver area. So if you are local to her, can you work with people across state lines or are you in
Yeah, so
Colorado
I can work with
only?
people located in the state of Colorado for any kind of therapy, trauma work. I can offer coaching anywhere in the world, but coaching just doesn't include any kind of trauma work at all.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm going to have all of her information in the show notes, so you will be able to find her and reach out if she might be the right fit for you. So, thank you all for joining us today. And if this episode resonated with you, would you please leave a review, follow the show, and share this with a friend? The more of these things that we get, the more ADHD women we can help. So, this is ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. And until next time, stay curious.